All right. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, my name is Shannon Barnsley. I'm 29. I'm from New Hampshire and currently living in Brooklyn. And I majored in creative writing / mythology and religion. So I'm love fantasy and sci-fi and anything that, uses world building and plays with mythology and mythic themes and that kind of thing. I am also chronically ill. I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, and hypothyroidism at the moment, at least. So,
Fun times.
Yeah.
All right. How did you find out about the anthology, and how did you feel when you found out about it?
So it was a bit interesting because I just got the email that the deadline had been extended, and I have no idea how I got on the mailing list for that. I must have signed up for something at some point, but I have no memory of it. So it just sort of appeared to me from the aether, and I was like, I feel like I should do this. Because being chronically ill, in writing circle, there's so much you have to write every day. If you don't write every day, you're a hack. And it's that's just not going to happen with chronic illness. And so it's really nice finding things that are in my niche, but also something that's really in my niche, that can also actually affect change, hopefully, and help people like me in some small way. So that was really exciting, and it was just this is perfect. And a friend sent me a thing about a different disability themed anthology around the same time, and so it was just this well, I guess I know what I'm doing this month. But even if I didn't get into this one or the other one, I'm still really excited to read them, because I want things like this to exist, because there is both so little representation and also such not good representation. And so any opportunity to have these stories exist is really exciting as a writer, reader, chronically ill person, etc.
That's actually the perfect segue into my next question, which is, what do you think about representation of disability in fiction?
I don't think I have long enough to really share all of my feelings about that, but I feel for a lot of things, I have several either rare conditions or conditions that are treated like they're rare, even though they're not, and those pretty much have no representation outside of sort of maybe metaphorical glimpses here and there. Because I have a folklore anthology background, I found this folktale one time that had this. It was an Icelandic folktale, and this woman, she knows when storms are coming because she can see the hidden folk bringing in their hay. And in my family, we've had a lot of similar health issues for generations, and so before we knew the term barometric pressure migraine or barometric pressure impacting POTS symptoms or EDS symptoms, it was oh, storms are coming. My mom and grandmother both did that, and so I was oh my god, it's us. It's just they didn't have the words for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or POTS. And so that kind of thing really fascinates me, and really the closest thing I've ever seen to POTS in the media is actually his Star Trek spoof, the Orville. This character is going back to her home planet, which has very high gravity, and because she's been away too long, she's not accustomed to it anymore, and she just steps off the little sort of bubble around the ship and just goes down. And that was very familiar to me, because actually astronauts can get POTS from being in space, because they get used to the 0G, and then when they come back to Earth, it's just the heart is nope. And that's the closest thing I've ever seen. And also she's in a wheelchair throughout the episode, and it's really exciting, seeing someone in a wheelchair who isn't paraplegic, because we have this weird sort of binary understanding in our minds that if anyone in a wheelchair ever stands, they were faking all along. I had to stop watching the show The Flash because every episode ended with the bad guy standing evilly from his wheelchair. And it's a lot of people don't get why I'm like mad about that kind of thing, because it's like, oh, well, it's just not a big deal. But people's perceptions of disability and chronic illness, because a lot of, us sometimes like we're not out and about, or like me, I look perfectly fine. So people generally don't even realize that there's, anything going on there. And so people get these ideas, from fiction more than they're actually talking to the people in their lives who have stuff like this. And so those, constant barrages of like, oh, this evil, nefarious faking person, that's what they see, and that influences public policy. And so people like harass people with POTS who park in, accessible spots, or they, they don't think that, people like me need any sort of accessibility accommodations or anything because I look fine. So obviously I'm just faking for the sweet parking spot, or I don't know what, I don't even have a tag for that. So I'm not sure what they think I'm getting out of this. But so, all these fictional stories, they might not, like people who don't have, a disability or, a chronic illness might not realize how much these things actually impact, the real world and have real world consequences, some of which can be like life or death with, whether or not people deserve health care, things like that. And it was actually sort of nice at the end of that episode of the Orville, the character, because she's the chief of security on the ship, and her, long story short, there's like a bad guy home invading her family's home, and she actually at the end of the episode leaps out of the wheelchair and takes her down. And it was kind of weird feeling because it was someone dramatically getting out of a wheelchair, but there was no, like, she wasn't faking all along. It was completely just, oh, you didn't expect that because you probably assumed she was a paraplegic or something. And it was kind of awesome. And that's not really actually POTS. It's never, I don't think it was intended to be at all like that, and it was never named, but just seeing something at all resembling me was really exciting. And I'm sure there's other people out there who need to see that even more than I do. So I want to help do that.
And why do you think it matters for fiction to have representation of everybody?
Well, like I said, it influences real world consequences, both like on a macro level with politics, and also on a micro level with like human interaction, and also just realism. Like, I mean, there are what I still forget the exact numbers, but like 20% of people have a disability and like 1% of people on the screen do. And with anything, with like, different religions or different ethnic backgrounds or different sexualities or just different, like, anything, seeing reality on the screen is important, one, for the people whose realities are reflected, but also for the people whose aren't, to be like, oh yeah, that exists, that's a thing. So it's just like us, like, nitpicking at, some story. It's important for all of, the sphere of social and public consciousness.
Tell me about why you decided to participate in the anthology.
Well, like I said, it was really just the cross-section of my interests and things that are important to me right now, because a lot of things in my life have sort of had to go on the back burner with dealing with these illnesses and also dealing with getting diagnosed, which is another thing in the media. We have this idea that I generally sort of blame on House, where it's like, one, that doctors will keep you in the hospital with, I don't know who's paying for it, until they find a diagnosis, which is so not how it works. But also that once you're diagnosed, they're like, oh yeah, here you go, you're fine. And we really don't understand that when people are diagnosed, that's not the ending. That's generally, even if it was a really long time, like when I was originally diagnosed with POTS, it was a 6-year diagnostic delay on average, and now I think it's down to 4. But even after like years, once you're diagnosed, that's really just the beginning of dealing with it, because we, again, sort of, it's like a binary. We don't understand that, because in the media, it's like you either heroically overcome something and inspire people, or you like tragically die and inspire people. And they're like, people like me, I'm probably not going to die from many of my illnesses, which is great, but also I'm going to have them unless research funding and science have some sort of sudden leaps. So I'm just sort of stuck in this in-between stasis where it's like I'm not dying, and I don't ill. At least some days I really do, but people don't really get that sort of gray area that just continues, and so people will like disbelieve me. They're like, "Oh, well, you're not better yet," and "Oh, you saw all those doctors and you're still not better." Obviously, nothing was actually wrong, which is interesting timing now because that NPR article that came out a week or two ago about, teenage girls with chronic pain are just not able to handle their emotions. And so if you just tell them to walk it off, they'll be fine. Or like in my current state that I'm living in, New York, there's Kirsten Gillibrand just put forth this bill to deal with the opioid crisis, but it's basically just make people who are in pain have a worse time and make it harder for them to not be in pain, which you see in a lot of things, like some environmental efforts. It's really just like, this isn't actually helping anyone. It makes you feel better, but it's actually really affecting all of these, people who you don't have to care about, but you should. So again, it's just all of these things that people who aren't living our lives aren't thinking about, and fiction reflecting that would maybe help them think about it.
Let's talk about your story. Tell me about why you chose a supernatural angle to explore this.
Well, like I said, I come from a folklore influenced background, and again, sort of the things that I've actually seen myself reflected in tend not to be medical narratives because they're more stuck in the like inspiring cancer patient, which my mom is actually in her third battle with cancer right now. So like, it's not like those stories don't need to be told, but maybe they should be told by cancer patients, which is one of the reasons why anthologies like this are so important. But also, so I had a couple of experiences that led to the story. I went into the ER in November and December last year, and I almost never go to the ER because I do get, "Oh, you're fine, walk it off. Why are you here wasting my precious time?" And I really, really, really don't ever seek emergency medical attention unless something is like so beyond normal. And so just going means that like, this is very, very, very serious. And I basically sort of got patted on the head and told that I was too, polite and pretty looking to be in pain. And it's like, would you rather I be a bitch? Because I don't think that would get the response you think it would. Which is why I actually bring my boyfriend to most of my doctor's appointments so he can repeat what I say exactly in a lower register. And suddenly it's magically meaningful. And I know it's hard for men and non-binary people as well getting medical care, but particularly women and teenage girls or just girls, you don't get believed. And it's hormones, or it's stress, or it's that you're too dramatic, or as I said in the story, the one doctor says it's just working yourself into a tizzy over natural fluctuations. And that was something a doctor said to me word for word in college when I was suddenly collapsing for no reason. And also the other line, we're going to put you on antipsychotics and up the dosage until something works. That's also word for word that same doctor, actually. He was a gem. And I intentionally, in the story, I don't have doctors say anything that wasn't said to me by a doctor. And those are word for word exactly what they said because they're just burned into my memory. And the scene in the ER isn't as word for word, in part because I was kind of loopy when I was in the ER, so I don't remember it exactly, but it's all essentially what he said. And I intentionally did that because I didn't want people to be like, "Oh, well, you're exaggerating. It's not that bad. It's an isolated incident," because I don't know a single woman with any chronic illness who didn't have a doctor tell her that it was all in her head. And actually, because this stuff has been in my family, and so I was around it even before I started noticing things myself, when I, thought I was healthy. Like my mom one time when I was little, she passed out and her tongue turned blue, and the doctor told my dad that, "Oh, she's just looking for attention." And my great-grandmother, who probably had one or more of the same things as me, was just hysterical. And so the older ghosts in the hospital who have hysteria and that kind of thing are sort of my nod to her, because she was not a happy or a nice woman, but she was not a happy or a nice woman because she was probably in pain and told she was just crazy her whole life, which is extra frustrating when they blame women's health problems on, oh, it's just anxiety or it's just stress, because anxiety isn't just anxiety. Mental illnesses exist and are valid and need care as well, and a psychiatrist would never look at someone and go, oh, it's just your liver. So doctors shouldn't try to do that either. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. But so having gotten that myself since the end of high school, you really do sort of feel like a ghost, because it's just like, you're sort of floating through life waiting for something to happen, and you're floating through all these doctor's appointments and they talk at you and they don't listen and they don't see you. When you do find a doctor, you just hang on for all you're worth because you never want to lose that doctor. But every single time I see a new doctor, it's like, oh God, okay, what's this going to be? Are you just going to tell me that I'm bored and making it up? Are you going to tell me that I'm psychosomatic? Which one is it going to be today? And actually, when I was in college and all of this was happening, I kept having seizures, and the doctor who told me that he wanted to put me on antipsychotics, he originally told me I wasn't having seizures. And I got my boyfriend, because he was a film major, to film me having a seizure. And then I showed it to him, and he's like, oh, okay, you are having seizures, but it's just psychosomatic because you can't handle something. And that's just not the case. When all of that started, my dog started alerting to me right before I would fall over, or like about 15 minutes before I would have a seizure. And it's like, I would be totally fine and not at all stressed. And the dog is just like looking at me. And it's like, okay, clearly something is going on because she knows it. And she's younger than your medical degree. So part of why I wanted this story to exist is that, like I said, my great-grandmother, she just died hysterical. And so there's all these people, both in the past and also today, who don't have the health insurance or can't get a second or third, fourth or fifth opinion, or just can't get care even if they do go see doctors, and they do have great insurance, and they're not being heard or listened to. And so I'm telling my own story, but I also want this to be heard for all of the people who can't tell their stories or get their stories out there, and also all the women in my family, probably before my great-grandmother, who also existed. And either it was hysteria or whatever before that, like demons or fairies or whatever. And so the one character sort of, it's not her that she gets the maddest for, it's the other girl when she sees it happening to someone else, and she never got a diagnosis. And so she sort of has been thinking, well, if I just got diagnosed, maybe if I just had, more of an opportunity, maybe it would have been better. And she sees that that's very much not the case, which when I think about my family, that's like, it was so much worse, but it's still so bad. And I am a middle-class white girl with excellent insurance for most of my life. And it's so hard. And so if it's so hard for me, it must be so much harder for so many other people.
Absolutely. And it's completely true what you said about women and being taken seriously by doctors. I'm actually transgender, and since I transitioned, I have had access to more specialists, and I've been listened to by more doctors than my entire life, and I transitioned like a year ago.
One of my friends from college actually is genderqueer, but is now sort of presenting much more male. And they were telling me that they actually had to learn how to stop talking because when you're a woman, you get cut off so much that you never learn. And so it's like, no one is stopping me. How do I stop? About having a, male or male appearing person repeat what you said exactly.
All right. Can you tell me, can you tell everyone where we can find you and your work?
Yes. So the best places to keep up with me, just with writing, is generally on Facebook. I have a Facebook author page that's Shannon Barnsley Author. And then on Twitter, if you don't mind some politics, I tried to keep them out, but it's just gotten too hard. I'm at Shannon Barnsley on Twitter. And on Instagram, it's a little less writing focused, but that's where I share the most about my chronic illness. On Instagram, I'm at Freya Folkvanger. And if you can't spell that, there's a link through anywhere else that I am. And also my Twitter account links to my personal blog, where I talk writing and chronic illness and the combination therein, and also mythology and the combination therein. And I have a book, Beneath Blair Mountain, and that's available on Amazon. And it mixes history and mythology and fantasy and horror. And it's not as overtly about chronic illness or disability, but it's definitely there if you're looking for it. So those are probably the best places to find me, and hopefully there will be more to come.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.